Ladies and gentlemen, the talk that I'm going to give today concerns how we should understand how and what children with cerebral or cortical visual impairment can see, or CVI for short, and using this knowledge to help them. So in this talk, I'd like to share with you a practical way of thinking about cerebral visual impairment as it affects children. Of course, we've just heard that it can affect adults too. We all think that others see as we do. We all self-reference, but nothing could be further from the truth. Everybody sees the world differently to everybody else because the way we see has been dictated by the world that we have been in and have been exposed to throughout our lives. But this is especially so for children with altered vision. So the reason for this talk is if we want to help children with cerebral visual impairment, we need to understand how they see, how they hear, and how they understand. And parents, yourselves, are the key teachers, and they need to know what their children can learn from, so that what is said and what is shown is all accessible, meaningful, understandable, and therefore can be learned from. So to learn, children need to be happy, comfortable, calm and relaxed, enjoying play, and able to see the learning material. And they need to be motivated and interested. So we need them to be in a world in which they are comfortable, without anxiety or fear. And if there are limitations to their ways of seeing, their ways of understanding, we need to know them all in detail. We need to understand them all, and therefore have a profile. And we have to have approaches for them all and use them all consistently. So, for children with cerebral visual impairment, we need to understand how the brain sees by creating the picture inside the mind. How the child sees when their brain sees differently, when their brain has created a different picture inside their normal mind. And the child's limits and abilities so as to stay within their limits, to use their abilities as new routes to learning, and then to extend those limits. We also need to understand that our brains, like computers, deal with information in the 3 dimensions of space and the other dimension of time. If I talk too quickly, you may not understand what I'm talking about. I have shortened time, but if I talk more slowly, maybe you might understand better. And that they cannot access information when there's too much to see, or it's too fast to handle. And that's why I am talking at a slower than normal conversation pace. Because for everyone seeing this talk, if it's not presented at a pace matched to their speed of processing, I've wasted my time. And theirs. So, what if their vision causes anxiety or fear due to illusion, the world appearing differently, or due to overload? So, how do our brains see? Our eyes work as a pair of cameras. The picture is formed on the retina at the back, and it's converted into electrical signals that go along the optic nerve at the back to the seeing brain. And in this diagram, where there is a blue ball at top left and a right ball at top right, the left visual field comes into the eyes and is passed to the brain at the back on the right. So the picture on the left side from each eye goes to the right visual brain, and the picture on the right side goes to the left visual brain. Once the information has got there, it gets processed. The brain that sees can be thought of as having a computer in the brain's occipital lobes at the back of the brain that process the input from the eyes, and a picture library in the brain's temporal lobes to know and understand what we see, and a map of the scene in the brain's parietal lobes to guide our movements. If you would put your palms over your ears, with your thumbs pointing backwards, your thumbs are now over your visual computer, your palms are now over your visual library, and your fingers overlie the map of the scene. Thank you. So first, let's talk about the computer. The computer deals with the area of the visual scene that we can see, or the visual field. And for this, I'd like to let me show a demonstration. So we're going to do it standing, aren't we? Thank you. So to demonstrate with Nicola's visual field, she has explained that it's more difficult to see on her right. So Nicola, if you could look straight ahead, please. And I'm going to move a white ball in from the side, and I'd like you to point at it when you see it. I understand your vision has improved a little bit on the right since you found out your diagnosis. Thank you, Nicola. What you saw there was that Nicola is not seeing well to the right side, and this means that she has what is called hemi, half, an, without, opia, sight, hemianopia. And it is in the same distribution of both eyes. It is homo, same, nimbus, distribution. So when you hear the term homonymous hemianopia, it means the same distribution in both eyes affecting one side, which is hemianopia, half without sight. So this picture shows how the scene is processed in the computer in quadrants. Let me show you how. When I put my hand on the top of my brain on the right, this area of brain sees in this quadrant down here. When I put my hand on the top of my brain on the left, this sees in my bottom right quadrant down here. When I put my hand on the bottom left quadrant, this area of brain sees in the upper right quadrant. And when I put my hand on my bottom right quadrant, it sees in the upper left quadrant. So, for Nicola, who did not see on her right, it is this area of brain that has been injured. Similarly, one of the commonest types of visual impairment in cerebral visual impairment is not to see the ground ahead and not to see down here. So, if a child does not see down there, does not see their foot when it is lifted, they have a lower visual field impairment, and that tells us that the place where there is an issue of an injury to the brain or an unusual development of the brain is here. In addition, the computer is also where the detail or the acuity is processed. And in the right picture, the acuity has been reduced using software which we've called SightSim by 20-fold. And it's an accurate demonstration of a 20-fold reduction in clarity of vision when compared with typical individuals. As well as telling shades of grey apart, such as contrast sensitivity. The picture showing that the low contrast sensitivity on the right side, and that's what that is like. And seeing colour. Colour is what we construct in our minds from what we see outside. Moreover, seeing movement is computed just in front of the occipital lobes in a territory called the middle temporal lobes. So this processed information in terms of the area seen, the field, the clarity or acuity, the amount of black or white, the amount of light or contrast sensitivity, and the ability to see movement, this processed information is rapidly passed to the picture library in the temporal lobes, which stores the pictures of everything that we have learned to see in the past. And so it's the temporal lobes that helps us recognize all the objects we see and know what they are for, such as the box, the pen, the watch, and the cup, which are shown in this picture. And as children, we learn all this. Everything we see and know, we have learned. But how can this information be learned if low vision makes this harder? The library also lets us recognize who people are and what their facial expressions mean. It also masters routes, our way around buildings we're in, and where we have put things. It creates the map of the world. When I drove here, I couldn't remember exactly how to get here, but as soon as I was in this part of Dumfries, we drove accurately and I was able to locate the hotel without difficulty. Despite not having been able to remember it, I could match it. Faces and routes are stored next to each other. That's why we may not recognize people who are out of place. And then the processed information is also rapidly passed to the mapping centre at the same time as it's being passed to the library, where the scene is mapped in 3D without us knowing. We do not know that we are mapping the world in 3D, so as to guide our movements. So it's just like a transparent object which becomes visible when it becomes wrapped. So the picture in the temporal lobes wraps itself onto the map, and so it is located. A pixel is one of the dots that makes up a digital screen image. And for 3D cinema and for head scans, the pixels have volume, so they are called volumetric pixels, or voxels. In the game Minecraft, the blocks that make up the pictures are voxels. So, this, in a sense, voxelated 3D map in our heads coincides with our surroundings, and so guides the movement of our hands and of our feet. If our voxels are big because we have fewer nerve cells due to injury, then of course our visually guided movements are less accurate. And this is called optic ataxia, impaired visual guidance of movement through our visual worlds. We all have optic ataxia. When I reach out for something straight ahead, I do so very accurately. But when I reach out for something at the side, I use a much wider grasp, or I gather it up. So the child who is simply reaching out and putting their hand on top of something, or gathering it up, is doing so in exactly the same way as we do, and is telling us that their vision in front, as far as it is mapped, is the same as ours is. And if you watch your own behaviour as you reach to different locations to the side, you will watch and see that totally automatically we adopt differences in behaviour to reach for things. And then think about yours and think about the child's. And if yours for that location is the same as a child's, that is, at least conceptually, the type of accuracy of visual guidance of movement that they have in the middle. Moreover, if the map has fewer voxels, then fewer items can be seen. This means that a person in a group cannot be spotted. A toy in a toy box can't be found. Crowded words become jumbled, and it's difficult to give attention. This is simultane agnostic vision. Gnosis is to know. Agnosia, not to know. Simultane, lots of stuff at once, simultaneously. So, simultane agnosia is not to know a lot of things at once and to have a limited capacity to embrace all the details in the scene. Have you tried to find Wally in a Where's Wally picture? In that context, you had simultane agnostic vision because it exceeded your capacity to find Wally. The visual computer then analyzes the information. This information is unconsciously mapped for all the senses, not just for sight but for sound as well, as a 3D mental copy of our surroundings. And the imagery is compared with the library data and painted onto the map, just like the Invisible Man had to be wrapped in bandages in Robert Louis Stevenson's novel in order to know he was there. So we have an invisible map that gets wrapped in bandages, wrapped in the picture that we know, and thereby gives it its three-dimensional configuration around us. So, our brains recreate what we see, and they map it. The picture that we see is entirely inside our heads, and then we cast that out onto the world, assuming that it will coincide with what we think is reality. So let's now think about the limits of seeing when the brain sees differently. But first, we must think of spectacle wear. All children with any type of visual impairment must be tested to see if they need to wear spectacles for imperfect optics or for lack of focusing, both of which are common. But thinking about the computer next, if one side is injured, then vision on the other side is impaired or absent, as we've already demonstrated with Nicola's kind assistance. And here is a picture of a scene that one would imagine that Nicola sees, but she's already told us she sees it in the middle. But when you move the eyes to the left, the area that's not seen has got more extensive. And when you move it to the right, the area that's not seen has become less extensive with respect to oneself. I'd like briefly to mention to you a remarkable case report which was a series of 6 cases described by Gordon Holmes in the journal British Journal of Ophthalmology in 1918, an experiment that would of course be unethical because these were 6 soldiers who had had shrapnel that passed through their posterior parietal lobes, the MAP. And in this paper, which is available on the website PubMed, you can drop it down in 2 parts if you wish to, is described in the BJO at the time had a parietal shrapnel wound, as illustrated in the 4 lower diagrams, which is where the shrapnel went into the brain and came out the other side. And you can see that he lost his lower vision, and that is the visual field plot in the top 2 diagrams. But also, Sergeant K could not map the world around him. He walked into everything, he bumped into everything, he crashed into everything. For movement, and he also, for search, he could only count 2 coins and counted 1, 2, 1, 2 when there were more coins in front of him. He had profound optic ataxia and profound simultanagnosia. In other words, this type of cerebral visual impairment has been known for the last 100 years. So, injury to the back of the brain on both sides can interfere with the computing functions. It can cause lower clarity and lower contrast, and needing a greater line thickness and higher contrast images to ensure that if we're teaching a child and also their everyday living is visible. Colour may appear washed out for those with cerebral visual impairment, but we can't know at present exactly to what extent, because it's very difficult to probe this. We've all shared that after-dinner question. How do I know that you see the same colour as I see? We can't. Or things may be too fast to see. They may see a propeller disappearing, with a speeding up propeller disappearing for the child with CVI before it does for others. So a moving car may not be seen. Let's think about the library. Faces and/or facial expressions may be difficult to recognise. What does that mean about communication? Possibly with specific difficulty recognising shapes, like the 2 dice shown here, letters or numbers, or objects like the watch. And if the map has bigger voxels, then fewer elements of the visual scene may be visible, possibly making only a single item in the scene visible and the rest blurred, making search, reading, or copying really difficult. To copy, you look up, search, find, look down, search, find, write. If you can only see one thing at a time, it's absurd to be asked to copy. In fact, it would actually break disability legislation in every country if we only knew that we were forcing children to do something that was impossible. No different to asking them to go down a wheelchair down a flight of stairs. The profoundly affected child may only become aware when surrounded by a tent with nothing else to see. Reaching with a less accurate map needs a wider gap between the fingers and thumb, as in B, or as in C, a hand over the top, or as in D, a gathering up approach. So the action with a less accurate map can affect all the body, or just the parts, such as the legs or the feet, which may be not knowing where the ground is, even when looking down. So that a lower visual field impairment may be more complex than that. There could also be impaired visual guidance of movement of the feet, even when using the upper vision by looking down. So that has yet to be researched and to be fully understood. and with the hands out ready to touch the door sides before this young man reaches them, this child shows his limited ability to see depth to guide his movement. Crowded places may be frightening. Not everything is visible. Fast-moving items may not be seen, and things may appear to be on collision course when they're not. We've called this looming on the CVI Scotland website. Finding and knowing the limits and staying within them is the next topic. So we need to be able to find and to know the limits of vision and to stay within them. This is not a negative model of thinking, it's a positive model, because there is no point whatsoever in giving children materials that are not visible to them, that cannot be accessed. So actually, what we're doing is not determining what is not seen, we're using this information to determine what is seen, so that we stay within the limits. Or, if they cannot be seen, we use alternatives. And through training and excitement and motivation, we help the child themselves to extend their own limits. We all know, in looking after children, that you can't make a child learn, and that when a child wants to learn, they do. When they don't, they don't. So here are a few ideas. For lack of vision on one side, if doors or doorposts are bumped into, a coloured marker at the child's eye level draws attention and can prove effective. Sitting to one side of the classroom and being taught from the good side, while being encouraged to find favourite food on the side that does not see so well, enhances education while motivating visual search on the other. So in essence, if it's the adult's agenda, you use the vision they've got. If it's the child's agenda, you motivate them to compensate for the vision they haven't. The sausages. So, children with acquired hemianopia have found that if one cannot see on the right side, the words on the right side of the page may not come into focus or view, so that they are missed. However, when the text is rotated through 90 degrees so that it can be read vertically downwards, the area that is not seen simply covers over the text which has been read, so that it does not get in the way. And I was taught that by an 8-year-old girl who came in reading a book tilted 45 degrees that way, with her head tilted 45 degrees that way, so no one would notice that she was reading vertically. There are languages where print is presented vertically. It's not abnormal or unusual, it's common sense. And of course the same applies the other way round if you can't see on the left, as shown in the bottom part of this diagram. Approaches for lower visual field impairment, often with lack of attention in the lower visual field, as I've mentioned, can include, when feeding, the approaching spoon handle is moved through the upper visual field so that the mouth can open, rather than the spoon being bonked onto the face as the spoon comes up from the bowl and hits the face. One can keep the floor space clear of obstacles and low furniture. Many children who bump into furniture get very cross if it's moved and must be involved in its movement. The belt, clothing, pocket or elbow of an accompanying adult is held onto as a guide to the height of the ground ahead. You don't want to get them to say, "Stop pulling on my clothes." Well, if I stop pulling on my clothes, I'll fall over and you'll have more work to do, because I'll have hurt myself, should be the response of the young person concerned. While white shoes can aid walking by being more visible. Telescopic hiking poles, which have got spring-loaded ends so they don't bang and hurt your wrist, can supplement vision with tactile guidance and can be very helpful on country walks for children with cerebral visual impairment who have the ability to walk like this. An adjustable reading stand makes the lower parts of the page accessible because it's been lifted up into the upper visual field, while a plain background cuts out the clutter. For approaches for reduced visual acuity and contrast sensitivity, one can play games and enlarge one's facial features so that they can be seen and responded to because they've become big enough. And making important bits like the eyes visible, and choosing the line width of the measured visual acuity or clarity is important. Here, it's an eyeless toy when vision is not clear. So it's easy to give the toy bigger eyes and to do exactly the same right the way through every single page of every book where the eyes are measurably smaller than the visual acuity has measured it to be. What is the point in making a measure, writing it down and filing it in a drawer? So when they are bigger than the line thickness of the measured vision, that is when you can see things. So the images on the right have been calibrated with the SightSim software to be equivalent to 2200 in American terminology, 660 in British, 0.1 in European, 1.0 in other European, but basically 1/10. So 2 balls become 2 circular blobs. 3 cars become beads, and 4 pumpkins become 4 oranges, because we've not realized that the detail is not visible, and so we are ships intellectually passing in the night. So you can see how the images on the right can be misinterpreted. So for the 660 vision for writing, one can see that a felt tip drawing is visible, but a pencil line image isn't. The child must write with the pen width that they have been measured by the visual acuity they can see. To give them a pen width which is narrower than you've just measured they can see, of course they can't actually see what they've drawn. And we are thinking as if they see as we do, not as they do. Moreover, the gaps between the lines are of course just as important because of course narrow gaps blur the picture. That is why food on the plate needs to be separated by that line width. Otherwise it all blurs into a mess. Stairs need to be made visible using colour, black and white contrast and shadow. If facial expression cannot be seen, one needs to be within the distance at which one's face can be seen, the facial expression recognition distance. All one needs to do with a child is to get at the distance and smile and say, this is a smile and this is me looking cross. What am I doing now? What am I doing now? And then move further back and further back. And for every single child that has an impaired visual acuity, that must be done to know the distance at which your disciplining frown is invisible. It's not there. And language needs to explain how everyone feels. So you put language to every emotion that the child is feeling. So they learn the language that describes their feelings. And then later, you use the same language for your feelings, to teach them theory of mind, to teach them to understand how you are feeling. I've heard the term blind autism used. Is that because we are autistic and that we don't have the theory of mind to understand what the child is seeing because we are not going through their minds? Or is it because they are? I'll leave you with that rhetorical question. And for colour, the commonest difficulty with colour is colour naming. So inserting a key noun like sky blue and grass green for a few weeks rapidly teaches all children the meaning of colour, because if you've got cerebral visual impairment or other intellectual difficulties, learning the abstract is extremely difficult. Learning the concrete is possible. And so always putting the known before the unknown in one's teaching, and never saying it's a blue sky because at the word blue they've switched off because they have no idea what you're talking about and sky's boring. So you say sky, oh, I know what that is. Blue, oh, I don't know what that is. But after a while it becomes known, and it's an extremely effective way of teaching all children colour. And it often solves the problem within a few weeks. For impaired perception of movement, think about which moving things are seen and at what speed, and which moving things are not seen and at what speed too. Prolong your facial expressions to match that speed, because if they're not there for long enough, they're not there. Older films without zooming or panning and limited movement are often preferred, while playing with balloons and beach balls gives progressive training in coping with faster movement. For impaired recognition, and despite good visual acuities, the sound of the footfall, the voice recognition, the shoes worn, and obvious skin blemishes aid identification, and pointing these features out can say, oh, that's Auntie Joan with her blue high heels again. While a coloured hat or a scarf can be seen from all directions to find the person in a crowd. And a flag helps identify the family car. For impaired orientation, coloured doors can help label cupboards and rooms, and at this juncture, for a lower visual field impairment, if one's possessions are stored in the upper cupboards, they are reached for more accurately, and they can be found. If they're stored in the lower cupboards, they're never found, they're never accessed, they're even forgotten about. And composing for roots, composing and singing songs that describe roots can be effective. On one occasion, one child learned and wrote her song, which was, I go to lamppost number 3, and then I go to the big green tree. And then on the way home she sang, I go to the great big green tree, and then I go to lamppost 3. And with that and her other verses, for the first time in her life at the age of 13, she walked to school and back using an alternative linguistic navigation system. For visual overload, one-dimensional search is helped by vertical and horizontal search. Books in the library. Try and find books in piles on the floor? Or is it easier to find them on a shelf when they're ordered appropriately? Does this tell you something about lining things up and putting them in the right place for children who've been given a label of autism? Or is it they've got dorsal stream dysfunction, another term for simultaneous agnostic problems, which many young people with autistic spectrum disorder have? Is it chicken or egg? So while impaired reading can be helped by good horizontal and vertical spacing, or a typoscope, a piece of black plastic with a slot in, to mask surrounding words, or a bar magnifier, which you'll note this photograph shows magnifies both in that dimension and that dimension. A bar magnifier that only magnifies in one dimension is no good, can prove very helpful. Not insisting on eye contact during a conversation, not in fact insisting upon the person facing you during conversation, but instead teaching to look between sentences helps the child to attend and listen, but not be forced to try to simultaneously process the language and the face at the same time. So this child here, where Dad is saying, look at me when I'm talking to you, the child should say, Dad, if I look at you, I can see your face, but I can't hear what you say. But if I look away at a blank area, I can actually hear what you say and understand it. What would you prefer me to do at the moment? The child doesn't know to do that. Cluttered classrooms like this can be very disabling because, of course, there is no RAM left in the computer for the map. And so you can't map everything. So where is what you're supposed to find? If you go into a supermarket and you're trying to look for the plastic lemons, how long does it take to find them? But if after the Christmas rush and there's nothing left on the shelves, there is one plastic lemon, you can walk straight in and find it. What does the child need to learn in? The deserted supermarket classroom. And let's just think about it. Why is it, I'm asking rhetorically, why is it that art galleries and museums throughout the world now hold most of their collection in the basement and only show one picture with a big blank space around it or one item with a big blank space around it? Because these professionals have recognized that if you want to learn and to study, you need singularities. You do not need to have the information and the beautiful work done by the children hanging on the walls, visually cluttering the scene up. The Japanese recognize this. Their classrooms are not cluttered. The children come to no harm because they've already done the work. They know they've done it. They're not really interested in seeing it again. And I might note that in many classrooms throughout the world, the material is hung at adult eye level. Why is that, I ask? So the uncluttered classroom like this enhances learning for everybody. And it's extraordinary that this message has yet to be learned through many countries of the world. And this uncluttered bedroom is relaxing. Decluttering at home and at school can greatly enhance performance, not only for children with cerebral visual impairment, but their brothers and sisters too. This country scene is relaxing, and children with CVI often come alive in such places. Perhaps because there is evidence that for some people who have an inability to see many things at once, country scenes seem to be unaffected because they're served by a different part of the brain, remarkably. For maths, visible graph paper helps prevent numbers in columns and rows from becoming jumbled, because it's the numbers in the picture in the mind you're thinking about, not the numbers out on the paper, while feeling the 3D shapes can help to understand geometry, and putting strings between the legs of an upturned chair can help to make the lines of geometry in 3D, feel them, and then retain that memory through touch, to retain that haptic memory. The pens used need to draw a line width that the child can see easily, and the width of the line drawn is likely to be the same as that for the best font. Arriving early at a children's party when it is quiet allows the clutter to build up, and then of course it's okay to leave early too. For car journeys, wraparound sunglasses may cut down the amount to see, so there is less to see, and so this can be more relaxing, while listening to music through headphones can provide distraction. For impaired visual guidance or of movement or optic ataxia, a child who cannot reach out because visual guidance of movement is not accurate can hurt himself or herself. And so, tactile bridging across the top of the parent's hand or moving arm or hand feels safe. This gives training while avoiding accidents, injury and fear, and promotes confidence, leading to independence. Teaching older children with impaired visual guidance of movement or optic ataxia can include using an extended little finger to identify the position of a surface when putting down a glass, or touching the table, the chessboard or pegboard with part of the body to locate it, or using the other hand to locate the surface first can help. A brick trolley designed not to run away nor fall over backwards for the young child, provides a tactile guide to the height of the ground and, by banging into them, the location of obstacles, and also has a shape that aids viewing of the ground ahead. Radio, and not TV communication, all the time is essential. Close your eyes and listen to the radio. It makes sense. But close your eyes and listen to the TV. Much of what you hear does not make sense until you open your eyes again. I've got friends who watch the football in silence with the radio on the top, listening to the cricket. Listen to the cricket and you can hear and see all the action in your mind's eye. But do the other way around and close your eyes whilst watching the football, it doesn't make sense at all. So we need to be radio parents. Not just radio parents, but radio emotionalists, putting the emotions that are being experienced by the child and your own emotions, once they've learnt them, into a language framework to teach theory of mind. So one needs to be inside the mind of the observer to understand and know what is seen and what is not, to be able to ensure that everything used to motivate and enhance skills and knowledge is perceptible and accessible, and to know what is exciting, interesting and fun, to bring about motivation, to facilitate neuroplastic brain development and growth, and to always work within all visual, perceptual and intellectual limitations to ensure that no effort is redundant, and to make things accessible to drive attention, to drive motivation, to drive learning, to gain happiness, independence and fulfillment. So in conclusion, the brain sees from inside to out. The limits of seeing need to be identified and profiled, documented and learned completely off by heart by everybody working with that child, and to fail to do so is betraying that child. They need to be known and understood, and to stay with them, to use alternatives, and where possible, through learning and understanding, to extend the limits. So every child with CVI has their own unique pattern of vision and hearing. It's unique. It's not a diagnosis. It isn't an it. It is a classification of a myriad different conditions. Because, of course, every single component of what I talked about is affected in different proportion and different degree and different extent in every single different child. And we need to realize that for everyone looking after them must know and be aware of and take into account, so that otherwise learning and development will be limited, because what one does not perceive, one cannot learn from. This diagram, or the tree of vision, can be interpreted from starting at the bottom. In a sense, the roots at the bottom are the roots of the source of the picture coming into the eyes, and then it's passed up into the trunk of the tree, where it's processed in different parts, some of which I haven't covered in this talk, and then have the different functions in the different pathways of the brain. And this diagram is worth studying, understanding, and learning. For information, there's a UK websites, are the CVI Society and CVI Scotland, have different purposes and different information. If you want to simulate visual acuity on your Android phone, go to this website, which means that you can drop down a piece of equipment for free which accurately simulates the vision. If you know your child's vision, you just put it in, and you can even test it you can test vision with it and measure their vision, and then see with the same acuity as the child by just using the phone, using the split screen version, so you can see as they see and you see. And There's also, if you want, a free basic textbook on the subject of all the different causes of visual impairment on this website. And just to say that the images were obtained by Creative Commons sources and Pixabay and from Google Filter, label for non-commercial use with modification. So I hope that with this information background, we can all move forward in giving children with cerebral visual impairment a better deal than before you came into the room. Thank you.